Mana mana, I hate Fnatic. Mana mana, da 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 da. Mana mana, how does he do it? Na 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 na, at fucking mages. Na 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 na, how did he get away with the way? Oh, hello there. We all have flaws. Like, if you don't have Acai Blueberry Gamer Subs, then you can't enjoy this delicious energy formula I'm about to drink. Just like you're in for shocks if you have a look where other companies source their caffeine. Spoiler, not organically. Because you see, without energy, a lot of you are going to fade as the day goes on. Just like Fnatic did against the Poles in the World Cyber Games 2009 final. Too bad they didn't use the code Thorin at gamersubs.gg for 10% off their order. Now, all the gods, no matter how good they are, in Counter-Strike history, in our pantheon of the great players at the different positions and the superstar names, they all have flaws. There were gods who didn't get it done at the majors always, or weren't as good at the majors. I mean, I know that might sound shocking because majors aren't everything. There've only been 15 of them in CSGO. I don't know how many there were in 1.6, but obviously there was 3 usually each year there. Now, you want players to get their best for the major because it's the biggest tournament. In theory, it's the most important tournament. But it's obviously not as reasonable that they will have all their best performances at the majors. It's quite rare that you get a cold zero who comes along with just nearly always money at the majors. Oftentimes, they have a team that isn't good enough, or their team is good, but the pressure gets to them, or maybe it's just a close match and everyone has a rough sort of game. So these are the gods, though. So we do expect that of them. It might not be reasonable, but that's why we hold these guys to the highest status. That's why I'm even calling them gods. I'm calling them people deities in a pantheon. We revere them. They're not just very good players to us aficionados, right? So one that might shock you, and I mean really shock you, is when you actually sit and think about who Shox is in CSGO. He was already one of the greatest CS Source players of all time. In CSGO, if you just look at his body of work, very few players have had as many years that were as excellent as he was. He has one of the most well-rounded, complete games. He's been fantastic as far back as 2013. You can go to 2016. You can go to, 2017. He still had moments. You come more recently, he's not as good now, but he's still on a top team, a team that's been top 2 in the world. So then, consider this. Despite being a top 10 player of all time in CSGO, out of the 15 majors, and Shox has attended all 15, he's one of those few players that has, he's only made top 4 at those 15 majors 3 times, and twice was within the first 4 majors, 3 times within the first 5. He made top 4 at DreamHack Winter 2013. Then he went to, skip through, DreamHack Winter 2014. He won it with LDLC. And then ESL won Katowice, Envious, LDLC rebranded, finished top 4. Now, to put that in context, Simple, who was banned from ESL majors for the first couple of years, has made 5 semi-finals or better, despite never having won the title. Now, beyond that, if I pull up the stats, it ain't pretty, is it? Look at some of these performances here. It's basically extremely rare that he ever had the true superstar performances. If he did, it was usually that he didn't play many maps. You notice he's never been at double-digit maps at a major. Obviously, in the early days, if you won 8 or 9, you probably won the major itself. He's had a number of times that were quite underwhelming. Like, yeah, look, early on, he has some pretty good stats overall. Even then, the fragging isn't always that high. Like, famously, look at the one that he won, DreamHack Winter 2014. Actually, his stats very pedestrian at that tournament. Wasn't a star player. Much better players. Later in his career, sometimes he's a good player on a bad team. So it's actually kind of shocking how whack those stats are for Shox overall. One of the truly great CSGO players. But the shocks don't stop there, my friends, because I've got one that's going to really surprise you, which is f0rest, a candidate for best ever player in Counter-Strike, and particularly in CS 1.6, his true home game. I don't even debate it. He is a top 2 player of all time for me. I personally think Neo was the better player though. And one factor is that f0rest at the majors had similar problems to what I've just shown you about Shox. Now, I don't have the stats to show you his individual performance, but I saw all the games. And when I described some of the context of these games for his team and the people they were playing, you might be pretty surprised and kind of underwhelmed that was such a great player, especially because he came from Sweden, a country that had most of the great teams of all time compared to any other country, and routinely produced major winners, and people won many, many championships and were team of the year type squads. So first things first, in 1.6, f0rest played in 7 major finals, and he was never an underdog in a single one of those major finals. So if you're not ever an underdog, you get to play 7 major finals. As a great player, 7's already a great number. As a truly great player, as long as you don't have a simple type scenario where you play amazingly, but everyone else shits the bed, which isn't what happened in these finals. f0rest very rarely was ever the guy carrying the final. You're expecting out of 7, I'm never the underdog. Like, I've got to get at least like 4. I've got to get at least over half. Let's say 5. If I can get to 6, I did awesome. Here's the stats for you. f0rest won 3 out of the 7. The 2 that he was a big favourite in, he lost. The 3 that he was a slight favourite in, he won 2 of. And then he had 2 that were a 50-50 coin flip, my judgment, and he won 1 of those. Now, the reason why this is shocking is because his rival for greatest 1.6 player of all time is, of course, Neo, the legendary Polish player. Poland, a country that produced 0 major ringing squads except the ones that Neo played in. They didn't even have squads that could make top 4 of the major, never mind win one. And not only that, but Neo played in more major finals than f0rest did, and won a lot more than f0rest did. And f0rest played with way more talent. That's ridiculous. Now, in terms of winning 3 majors like f0rest did, let me put that in context. Potty, the other greatest Swedish player of all time for my money, won 5 majors. Neo won 6, or if you count IEM Season 1 finals, he won 7. Markelov won 4. Markelov even won 4 in a row, 2010 to early 2011. f0rest has 3 ever, no matter how good his teammates were. Now, some other details. His teams, because they often had a lot of skill and had great team play, were often favourites to win pistol rounds compared to Neo's, which was somewhat underskilled. Now, if you look at the rest of f0rest's career, he won way more prize money than Neo. He had a lot more top 3s and top 4s than Neo. He had a lot more consistency in terms of number of good and top years than some other players out there. Probably most players in history. I'd say Neo's his only real candidate in that regard. But at the majors, he wasn't able to get it done at the same superstar level that made all those amazing frag movie clips that we all love and enjoy. Now, from one Fnatic great to another set, let's go to CSGO. Who was the greatest team of all time before Astralis 2018, near the end of the year, really kicked in and took their era? It was obviously Fnatic 2015. But what do people forget about this team? What was their ultimate flaw? In their head-to-head against their main stylistic rival, their main rival for championships was NV/LDLC, and they sometimes had back and forth there. Their main, and actually they dominated them overall, but if you want to look stylistically, it was always against the Danes, because obviously Sweden, Denmark, and it was the Danes of the TSM core, now Astralis, of Device, Dupree, Zipnix, when they had Carrigan as their in-game leader. Now, the era for Fnatic was obviously in 2015. They won back-to-back majors. They were the first team to ever do that. They had tons of events that they won. I think they won something like 12 titles. One was an exhibition show. They had loads of top 4s generally, and they earned GOAT status, justifiably so, from what they did. And by the way, that says a lot that they were able to overtake the NIP that went 87-0 and had something like, I think something meant like 23 tournaments that they were top 4 or better at. But the thing that people forget is, in this Fnatic era, when they played against one of their main rivals, arguably the 2nd or 3rd best team of the year, the team, probably 3rd overall, TSM, they lost 6 out of 8 times on LAN in best of 3 or best of 5 series. So they lost MLG, the 3rd place decider, when it was Dignitas, 0-2. They lost 0-2 in the upper bracket of PGL CCS kickoff. They lost 1-3 in the final of PGL CCS final. Now, to be fair, that was actually with a 1-map upper bracket start for them, for the TSM guys. Now, Fnatic lost 0-2 at the next tournament, Face It Stage 1 finals in the semi-final. They went to Fragbite Masters. They won the upper bracket 2-1. Then in the final, they lost 1-3 in an actual best of 5 with no upper bracket advantage from what I remember. They beat The TSM guys in an exhibition series where you just played all 5 maps, they won 4-1 in that one. And then at PGL Season 1 finals, they lost 0-2 in the upper bracket. Now, if you take out the 2 less meaningful matches, the 3rd place decided that Dignitas won at MLGX Games Aspen, and the exhibition series where you just played 5 maps, that takes away a loss and a win in terms of the guys from Fnatic and TSM each. So that means that in 5 out of 6 meaningful matches, in proper series, on LAN, those 2 lineups, the guys from TSM, the Danes with kArn's, won those matchups. They dominated the head-to-head. They owned their main rival and the team that got that era. That is a flaw for the Fnatic guys. Let's stick with Fnatic for now, shall we? In 1.6, f0rest's great in-game leader was cArn's. He is a contender for the best in-game leader of all time. He had 2 different lineups that were the team of the year. 2007 Fnatic, it was the one with Tentpole. Then he had 2009 Fnatic, the one where they had Gux and Getright. They won 2 majors with these teams. They won 2 majors during his time in 1.6, but one of the majors, especially a prestigious national one, was the World Cyber Games, the Olympics of Counter-Strike. And in that particular series of tournaments, cArn's has 0 gold medals. There's even a qualification issue. Like, Sweden was the most competitive region to qualify to the World Cyber Games, and so as a result, there would often be upsets. Well, cArn's only qualified and went to the finals on 2 occasions. The 2 years where he had the team of the year. 2007, when they'd been winning tons and tons of tournaments from the summer onwards. Then they went there. They were in a tough group stage. They tied with MIBR and Dust 2. Dust 2 was famously the map that always haunted them. And then they lost to Eastro, the Koreans of Solo and Bale, the team that later became We Made Fox. Didn't get to the playoffs. Then in 2009, they were wrecking all the tournaments throughout the year. They got to the World Cyber Games. They were stomping the tournament. In the final, they played against the Poles of again, of Neo and Taz. And they were leading in map 1. They were looking great. It was the epic nuke game. Back came the Poles. The Poles won in overtime. Then the Poles won on the train game, hence faded with energy. And they lost that WCG gold medal. Beyond that, he failed to qualify on 2 occasions. 2006, it was the NIP squad that was the best Swedish team that year. 2008, again, you could argue maybe there were other good teams. That was one where they had their issues. Then 2010, they had this issue where after the Swedish qualifier, you had to go to this WCG Nordic with all the Nordic countries, and they just chose not to go, so SK Gaming went, even though at the time, Fnatic was the better team in Sweden. In 2011, they were second, clearly second, because SK was much better and had won ESWC, and even though they had a slot for World Cyber Games by coming second, they actually chose not to attend because WCG only covered the expenses of the first place team. And by the way, in past years, from I think 2010, before 2010, you never used to be able to send 2 teams anyway. Actually, maybe that's not. Maybe you did 1 year. How about the Astralis team? Now, we know the 2018-2019 team, greatest team of all time. Even before that, they were nearly always an elite team. But they have never won, ever, an ESL 1 title. So more importantly, what is one of the crown jewel events of the Counter-Strike circuit in CSGO? It is ESL 1 Cologne, the cathedral of Counter-Strike. Now, not only have Astralis never won an ESL 1 Cologne title, they've never even been in a final at the event. And they were not only the greatest team of all time, but they were an elite team from 2015 to 2019, minus 2016. So in 2014, when it was a major and they were still Dignitas before they had kArn's, they made it to the semi-finals and they lost 0-2 to Fnatic. It was only Fnatic's second event with the lineup with Krims, Olaf Meister, etc. Then 2015, it was another major. This time around, they'd been beating the Fnatic guys all the time. They hoped this was going to be their major. They lost to Envy, their classic rivals that used to beat them in the head-to-head. 3-map series in the semi-finals, pretty good series. 2016 was a major. It was the one where, unfortunately, they had that situation where Kirby couldn't play, and then Glaive had to stand in. Dupree had his issues. So in that particular one was the one where they basically, I think it's where they had Zonic play, and they lost a close round of 8 series against Virtus.pro. Device went ham, but Virtus.pro was super clutch at the majors. 2017, they famously skipped the tournament to go to PGL Krakow, the event afterwards, and try and get more practice in, obviously hoping they'd win it. Sadly fell in the semi-finals. 2018, when they were already in their prime, ready to become the GOATs of the game, they lost that epic series to Na'Vi. We're on the 3rd map. It was a really close game on Inferno, and Zeus dropped the 30 bomb, so didn't get to the finals then. 2019, they were working their way back into the form they'd reached at Starladder Berlin, but they weren't quite back to the best form, no matter what the other people on the analyst desk told you. And they lost the 3-map series to Vitality and were outplayed on some of the other maps. Then in 2020, the online period when they had Esatag and Bobski, this wasn't really the team that counts, but I'll throw it in there in case people want to be complete. They lost to NIP 0-2 in the quarterfinals. The final team I want to reference, the set of gods that had their flaws, has to be the Luminosity / SK Gaming lineup that had the brief and arguably disputed era in 2016, where they won back-to-back majors, they won a couple of other tournaments, but what was the flaw? They didn't win enough other tournaments. They had plenty of good placings, but to be an era-defining team, the majors get you so close, but then if anything, they get points taken away for not having enough other tournaments, not enough measure of excellence across them. Because obviously their era began with winning MLG Columbus, the major. Then they went to DreamHack Malmo, got banged out before the playoffs. Then they won DreamHack Open Austin, but only against NA and South American teams. Then they won ESL Pro League Season 3 Finals, very legit tournament, even though they narrowly won it, but they won it nonetheless. They went to ECS Season 1 Finals, came second, got banged out by the team that almost beat them at EPL. The old boys of Shox and Scream. Then they went to ESL 1 Cologne. They dominated the tournament, lost one map only, won another major. Now here are some stats for you which show you that this team really could have had an amazing era. For 8 LAN tournaments after the Cologne that they won, where they stopped winning, they made the semi-finals or better, but never won a tournament. Now, a couple of those were after when they went to their lineup with Fox, when they didn't have FNX anymore, the very last ones. Then, if you look before Columbus, they had 3 straight LANs with semis or better that they didn't win as well. Now, the following year, this is the unfortunate aspect, they had the streak of dominance. They won 5 out of 6 titles going into PGL Krakow and then couldn't even make the semis of PGL Krakow. So all the great players in history earned their status as the great players by winning enough tournaments, by winning a major at times, by being truly great individually as teams, by being amazing teams, having great styles, innovating things in the game, having enough success against the field. But even the gods had their flaws. This video was kindly supported by Pronogo, Mohammed, Alabdul Razzaq, Dean Tanglis, James Pederson, VatriSam, ErikHillestad, Andreas Kroknes, Hades, Zoomba Gaming, JDubs, Tobias Bernasconi, and Alexander Rao. Special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for one of my upcoming episodes? Maybe you want to ask more of those questions in that video AMA I do each month. Do you want teasers? Find out who the next guests are for my shows. Well, maybe you even want to take part in one of those crazy donated discussions where we go all over the place. If any of these perks appeal to you, or you want to support the channel, put your money where your mouth is and join the Illuminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.